Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Liverpool have moved 11 points clear in the Premier League title race with their Egyptian king leading the way. His goal and assists are edging him towards records set by Henry and De Bruyne. Mohamed Salah is one of the Premier League's greatest, but could he be the greatest? All right, with us today, we have the big guns with us. Fresh from watching the game at the Etihad, we have Oli Kay, as well as Simon Hughes, author of Chasing Salah, the Biography of Mohamed Salah. Gents, good to have you with us. Oli, let's start with you. Liverpool fans were singing, "We're going to win the league" at the end of the win at the Etihad. Look, they are 11 points clear at the top of the Premier League. Surely there is no catching them now, is there?
Well, it's begun to feel like that. Even if you go back, Arne Slot pointed this out. If you go back to post-match at Aston Villa on Wednesday night, and they just drawn 2-2 Liverpool, and he was being asked about, are your team getting nervous? Are they getting anxious? They played poorly in victory over Wolves the previous weekend, I think a lot of people looked at this weekend. I think Arsenal fans probably looked at this weekend and thought, if there's a chance to pull things back, it's going to be this weekend, because Arsenal were home to West Ham, and Man City against Liverpool. It felt like there was perhaps an opportunity for things to swing in Arsenal's direction, but the exact opposite happened. Obviously, West Ham won at Arsenal on Saturday afternoon, and then Liverpool went to the Etihad, and a really mature, grown-up, comprehensive, formidable performance of champions, you would say, champions in waiting at least. And I think that their supporters have been a little bit reticent and reluctant to sing about winning the league. They've been stung a couple of times over the past decade, but it's I think you heard it at the final whistle there. It was we're going to win the league, and then as the ground emptied, it was hand it over Manchester, which I think is I think City probably looked like they were resigned to handing it over 3 or 4 months ago, but I think Liverpool, everybody knows now, or everybody thinks they know where the trophy's going.
Yeah, Simon, there's a bit of footage with Liverpool fans staying right till the end of the match, and actually after it had finished, still singing their hearts out, because what an emphatic win away at the Etihad. But I guess the style of the win was also interesting, and two things really. How interesting is it that Slot has been able to sort of mould his team and to adapt to any situation that's faced them? But secondly, we also have to talk about Mo Salah and how it felt so inevitable that he was going to have a part in what went on.
Well, I thought it was a complete performance, really. I haven't seen Liverpool play that way before in a big away game. Over the years, Liverpool have had some big results away from home, mainly based on, solid defensive performance, nicking a goal, or executing the counter-attack perfectly on occasion and getting a big result. This was a bit different because they soaked up a lot of pressure. They defended really, really well. But they counter-attacked at will and used the ball brilliantly. They were just so good in and out of possession. And as soon as Liverpool opened the scoring, it felt inevitable, I think, that Liverpool were going to win the game. And not very often you've been able to say that over the years. It's always been a bit of a struggle when they've got a big win at either Manchester club or some of the London clubs. But this was, I think it was a perfect performance, really. And I actually don't think there's been enough conversation about the impact Slot has had on it, because Salah was that brilliant on the day. To go to City and basically play 4-2-4-0 without a striker.
Yeah.
Had it gone against Liverpool, I think he'd have got a lot of criticism for that. But to go with that system in a big game away from home and master it, I just think it worked perfectly for Liverpool. And a performance and results to go down potentially in history, I think.
I just wondered what kind of statement it really made, Oli. Liverpool, I don't think, have won at the Etihad since 2015 or something like that, and actually to win in such an emphatic way and with clarity and purpose. was really fascinating for Liverpool, and almost, now going 11 points clear, it's a real sort of flag in the sand to say, do you know what, come and get us, because every time and every week we say, oh, here's a new obstacle, they just seem to overcome it.
Yeah, if you look at the Premier League table, it's 11 points clear. It is Arsenal have played a game fewer, and I think it's worth mentioning that, but it doesn't feel as relevant as it did on Saturday morning, because once it gets to 11 points, once you've seen a performance like that from Liverpool at City, once you've seen a performance like Arsenal produced at home to West Ham, it doesn't really feel relevant. It doesn't feel like there's enough jeopardy now in this title race. So yes, it's 11 points clear with the game in hand, but it probably just feels like about 20 points now to Arsenal, because every time they've got almost within, not even within touching distance, but within sight, Liverpool have pulled away again, and Arsenal have stumbled. And it was two big statements this week. It was a statement Arsenal failed to make and a statement Liverpool did make. And I agree with Si, because it was a really, really mature, composed, resilient, intelligent, polished, incisive performance. It was. I would say it was. You put it, measure it with their performance against Manchester City at Anfield as well in early December, and that was outstanding in a different way, because they had more of the ball that day, and just dominated City in a different way. But those two performances, I think you've seen. Two outstanding wins. And look, I know people will say, and I will say, that beating Man City is not the achievement it has been in the last 8 or 9 years. They've lost eight Premier League games this season. They've lost games in Europe, but since the turn of the year, it's taken good performances to beat them. They've lost to Real Madrid twice, PSG, Arsenal, Liverpool. 4 of the best teams in Europe, 4 teams who played really, really well on the day, on the different days, and that Liverpool performance was right up there. It was good enough to make you think there is, if it was a slightly feckless team or slightly frivolous team that was 11 points clear with having played a game more, you might think, yeah, they might let the opposition back in. But this team, it's a very serious team. You look at Alisson, you look at Van Dijk, you look at Salah, you look at Gravenberch and McAllister in midfield. Don't get necessarily the plaudits, but they are 2 guys who are having an outstanding season, really intelligent footballers. It doesn't feel to me like there's a way back into this title race for Arsenal or anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we've talked about the team effort, and it has been an incredible team effort this season, Simon. But we have to talk about the Egyptian king that is Mo Salah. I mean, I don't know how many stats I'm going to throw in through this podcast, but there are so many. This was the 11th time this season he scored and assisted in a Premier League game. That's the most in a season across Europe's big 5 leagues since Lionel Messi did it for Barcelona in 2014-2015 season. And you add to that, Mo Salah has now scored 13 goals in his career against Manchester City. Only against Manchester United 16 and Spurs has he scored more. Now, what does this say about this player who, some might say, is in the latter part of his career, about his dependability in the biggest games for Liverpool? But also, I guess, Simon, in the most decisive moments, he always seems to come up clutch.
Yeah, I mean, he always turns up, doesn't he? And the thing that made me laugh about Liverpool's opening goal yesterday, I know what he was saying, it was a well-worked corner. So Manchester City had Rico Lewis marking Virgil van Dijk from a corner, which, okay, Pep Guardiola tends to go against the grain, doesn't he, and do something that's less obvious. But I'm just thinking, well, if Virgil van Dijk heads the ball, he's going to win it, isn't he? So, and then not only that, he left Mohamed Salah standing alone pretty much in the middle of the box. You have been warned about this. If you leave Mohamed Salah in sight of goal, he's invariably going to score. So it was a well-worked corner by Liverpool, but I think certain things just didn't make sense from Manchester City's perspective as well. But he his celebration in the goal was quite casual as well. It was just like, yeah, I should be doing this now.
It's been like that all season, to be honest.
It's been like that all season, yeah. And it was a. I mean, run out of superlatives to come up with description of how how much of an impact he had on the performance. But what really impressed me yesterday was without the ball as well. You know, his work rate was incredible. Not something that you necessarily associate with him. It's not that he's a lazy player, but you don't really see him sort of in his own half so much. And he was just brilliant on that front as well. But, you know, every time he touched the ball, it just came alive. It just felt like something was going to happen. And maybe I've said this before, so apologies if I have, but the strange thing about him is he arrived at Liverpool as one player, you know, somebody who could just burn past the opponents and to devastating effect. Now he's an altogether very different footballer. You know, he's sort of redesigned his game. You know, a bit like, I don't know, sometimes when I watch him, I've only seen videos of Kenny Dalglish, but it's similar. You know, he uses his back a lot, uses his strength, sees the gaps in the defence, and he always manages to create space for himself. You know, no matter the opponent, he always seems to know where to be on the football pitch. And you know what? I think there were signs of this at the very first game of the season against Ipswich. You know, they've got a good, talented left back, Leif Davis, who people were talking about should get a chance with England. And I just remember that game, Salah was just like, just too good for him. And he's been like that pretty much every game. And I just don't think there's any stopping him now. I think he will break some of the assist and goals records this season. It's impossible to see him not doing that. I just don't think the opponent seems to have any answer to his greatness at the moment, which is a mark of greatness.
All right, brilliant. Well, let's look more into that greatness, because next we'll look deeper at Salah's numbers and assess where he stands amongst the Premier League's greats. Simon, he scored 44 goals in his first season at Liverpool, which propelled them to the Champions League final in Kiev, as well as to fourth place in the Premier League. Has he had a better season than this one, though? Because we've talked about it so much, right? Like, everything he touches just seems to turn to gold at the moment.
I think this season's been better. It's a more rounded Salah. I've enjoyed watching him more, because I think it's a lesson to any young footballer as well. You know, that you can change a game if you work and you study the game, which he does, and takes himself, you know, very seriously in a professional sense. So I love that side of the story, really, because I think now, you know, you see footballers when they burst onto the scene, particularly ones with pace, they sort of fade away, you know, in the back ends of the career, where Salah just seems to be getting better as a very different footballer. So I'm enjoying watching that transition, really. You know, it's particularly in attacking senses, you don't see that many older players these days, aside from Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi, you know, but he just seems to be getting better and better and better. I'm sure, you know, there's data that says, well, the physical side of his game might be deteriorating in certain parts. If that exists, no one is yet to produce it publicly anyway. But I just think that I just love watching the way he always manages to find a place in the game. Even when he's quiet, he's alive. You know, and I know some of the commentary yesterday was talking about Messi and how, you know, sometimes he would just be, sometimes standing still is fine. You know, you don't have to be moving all the time. Sometimes you just have to wait for the ball to come to you in the right part of the field where you affect the game. And that confidence in himself, I mean, I think he seems more confident than he's ever been of his own place. So for me, I've enjoyed watching this version of him more, albeit, you know, nobody expected Mohamed Salah to score all the goals that he did in his first season. So there was that sort of surprise element of it. Nobody expected Liverpool to be going to the Champions League final, which they did. But I would say he is equally influential on, you know, the direction of Liverpool's season in both campaigns.
Yeah, Oli, has he been better this season, do you reckon?
Then his first season was remarkable because we were just seeing him score. I mean, look, not all of them were Puskas award contenders, but it almost felt like that at times. There were just a number of amazing goals. He was such a surprise package. He was so fast. He was electrifying. He was, you know, there was something a little bit Messi-like in some of his dribbles, some of his goals. I'm not saying he's a Messi-like player. He's not. Nobody is. But he was that sort of exciting. He was suddenly the best attacker in the Premier League overnight, and it was that was a thrill to watch him burst through in that season. So I was talking about physical decline. If we'd been on this podcast last season, I would have said, well, look, he is clearly in physical decline. I felt he was. I felt we saw less and less of that acceleration, bursting past defenders. He looked frustrated a lot of the time. He had games where he was quite peripheral, and look, his numbers at the end of the season were still really good. What is it? Let me just bring it up. It was 18 Premier League goals in 32 appearances. It was 25 goals in all competitions, loads of assists as well. But there were a lot of games where you just thought he's not made an impact today. He looked quite peripheral, and there were conversations. Well, might Arne Slot see him as somebody who could perhaps offload and sell and before he enters the final year of his contract and use that money, reinvest it, address all the other weaknesses that we thought existed in this Liverpool team, which suddenly don't seem to be there. So look, I'm amazed by what he's done this season. Not that I've ever doubted his quality, but I thought he was on the way. Now I didn't think he had the ability to step up again and raise his level even higher. And just one thing I just wanted to say about him. I thought it was a really interesting comparison yesterday. We saw Doku and Savinho on the wings for City, and on the face of it, they both had really good games. They were a menace. If City were going to threaten, it was going to come through those two. And they must have. I mean, I don't know how many dribbles the pair of them completed through the 90 minutes. It felt like
Savinho only completed one. He'd had quite a lot of dribbles, but he completed one.
Well, he certainly ran with the ball in a menacing way, and Doku, twisted Alexander-Arnold sort of inside out twice in the space of a few seconds very early on, and then again. But for all that dribbling, the end product just isn't there. With those two players, and it hasn't been consistent all season. And look, they're still young, but if they want to work out how to take their game to the next level, just look at Salah, who doesn't almost chooses his moments these days. I'm just looking. Salah's dribbles, it's less than 2 successful dribbles per 90 minutes now, whereas Doku is more than 6 per 90 minutes, which is a mad difference, because you look at it and say, well, who is the more effective wide player? Doku, who might get a goal or an assist every few weeks, or Salah, who's getting goals and assists in almost every game. It's what Salah's doing is fantastic. It's brilliant. It does put him. Look, his career in the Premier League already puts him in that conversation about great players that we've seen in the Premier League. But this season, I think, probably dispels the convenient, easy narrative that he doesn't do this or he does that, or he's a selfish player. He might be selfish at times, but he's also one of the best creative players, one of the best assisters. Assisters, is that a word?
You've just made it up. Take it.
Assistants that we've seen in the league. He's just a fantastic player.
Yeah, as you're talking about Premier League greats, Oli, I mean, sorry to throw more stats at you, but this season he scored 30 goals in all competitions, 25 in the Premier League, 21 assists, or assistants, as you like to call it, in all competitions, and 16 in the Premier League. I mean, when you talk about Premier League greats, I'm thinking about the 2 great seasons Thierry Henry had, where it was 30 plus goals and so many assists. Cristiano Ronaldo, 40 plus goals in a particular season. These are 2 comparable wide players that were absolutely superb and tore the Premier League to shreds. We can put him in that category for sure, Oli.
I think so. I mean, if you're talking about Premier League greats, I would. My instinct, for the last 20 years, has been that Thierry Henry has been the great attacker of the Premier League era, even more than Shearer, even more than Cristiano Ronaldo, whose real, true kind of, his real prime came at Real Madrid. But Salah's up there in that conversation in terms of not just hitting heights, but sustaining heights over a really, really long time. It's been in the Premier League 8 years now, and a bad season for Salah is like one of the best seasons of most players' career. He's been outstanding, and I think I would still keep Thierry Henry at the top, because I felt like for probably a 2-year period I was watching the best player in the world, or the best attacking player in the world at that time. I mean, Ronaldinho would be the other one that you would throw in at that time. And it was also a time when the Premier League was much more defensive. There were a lot fewer goals in the Premier League. So when he was scoring 30 goals in a season, it felt like, I mean, he was head and shoulders above everybody else, even Van Nistelrooy and Fowler and Owen and Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, other players that were around at that time, young Wayne Rooney. Henry was absolutely incredible. To me, he is unsurpassed in terms of that level within the Premier League. But look, Salah is absolutely part of that conversation, and anybody who dismisses Salah's claims to being an all-time Premier League great, or Rodri's, or De Bruyne's, or Van Dijk's, look, we are witnessing modern greats, and they are, in terms of the level they're reaching, it is extraordinary.
Yeah. More
maybe
stats.
Not De Bruyne yesterday, to be fair.
Yeah, well, I want to come to that later on, because that was an interesting one to watch, and that decline is really interesting. Now, this season, Salah, Simon, has overtaken Robbie Fowler, Henry and Lampard in terms of goals, and he's just 2 behind Sergio Aguero. Now, I want to also compare him to another Liverpool great who had an astounding season in 2013-14, Luis Suarez, who, let's face it, some would have said single-handedly almost carried Liverpool to the title. Is Salah a better player than Suarez all round? Because that season that Suarez was on fire, I mean, I remember goals against Norwich that he just obliterated them beautifully, and also he was just so dangerous. Is Salah better than that?
It's very hard to say who's better. I think you can assess the impact that they have at the club and the team at the time. I remember thinking, or certainly writing anyway, when Suarez was at Liverpool, if he'd stayed the same length of time as Salah, then there'd be more of an argument for Suarez. But when you leave, it means that it reduces your argument. So Salah should be mindful of this at the moment. You know, I'm sure we're going to get onto his contract situation.
What, you've forgotten at Anfield if you leave? Is that how it works?
Well, it's not that you've forgotten, but it takes away from the legend, not the legendary status, but it reduces your argument around greatness, I think. Okay. And Trent Alexander-Arnold might find that as well. I think, just drawing it back a little bit to what Oli was talking about with Henry, I think what helps Thierry Henry's argument is that he's Arsenal's all-time top scorer. Now, Salah is a little bit unlucky that he's got Ian Rush ahead of him. So if we could say, oh, Salah is Liverpool's all-time top scorer, straight away, you know, given Liverpool's history, which obviously Arsenal are a massive club, but Liverpool have won, you know, 6 European Cup Champions Leagues, which is something Arsenal haven't done. Obviously more league titles. To do that at Liverpool would be absolutely ridiculous, to be honest. So he is unlucky that he's got Ian Rush ahead of him. I think if Salah, you know, could extend his Liverpool career by 4, maybe 5 years doing the same thing, he might be able to compete with Rush. But to answer your question on Suarez, I mean, I love watching Suarez at his best. You know, he was a tornado, wasn't he? I mean, you couldn't stop him. 2 totally different players. I think they'd actually play really well together. It's one of those sort of only things. But, you know, as it stands, you know, Salah, as Oli said, consistently over a long period of time has just been ridiculously good. And I think, I suppose, what he lacks at the moment is, obviously, like Henry, you know, Henry won, was it 2 or 3 league titles with Arsenal? Yeah. Salah only has 1. Strangely, in those sort of 2 seasons, winning the Champions League and then the league, he wasn't quite at his very best. You know, even when Liverpool actually got over the line. I remember I wrote the other day about how Sadio Mane in 2019, when Liverpool win the Champions League and Salah scores in the Champions League final, Sadio Mane finishes above him in the Ballon d'Or, as does Virgil van Dijk. You know, statistically, it wasn't Salah's greatest season. This season, you know, given the number of goals, given what Liverpool could win, I think that will, from Salah's perspective, it will top everything that he's done before at Liverpool, because he could finish Premier League's top scorer, could win the Ballon d'Or, could win the Premier League, might even win the Champions League. So that for him, you know, that is the stuff of legend, isn't it? Which will put him way ahead of somebody like Luis Suarez, because ultimately Suarez couldn't get over the line when it mattered, unfortunately for him.
Yeah, Oli, the Ballon d'Or question is really interesting for me, because it's something we were talking about yesterday on the Athletic WhatsApp group, and we were saying, why has Salah never picked up the Ballon d'Or or even been considered in the top 3 for the Ballon d'Or? If you go by what Simon's just said, you know, that those, you know, league winning seasons or Champions League winning campaigns, he probably wasn't the star player through that period. But is it just that, or do you think there's more to it?
It's fascinating with the Ballon d'Or. I mean, it is a popularity contest. I would say that more often than not, it's the right result. And I know some people think Messi got more than he deserved. I almost tend to think Messi got taken for granted so much that he got fewer than he deserved. But it's generally dictated by winning the Champions League, or winning the big prizes, or winning the World Cup or the Euros. Playing in AFCON doesn't seem to register as much, sadly. Does that mean there's discrimination against an African player? I wouldn't think so. But look, he's had an outstanding season. If you were saying right now who has been the best player in world football this season, I think you would say Salah. If you're going for an attacking player, you would say Salah. I think you could make a really good argument for Van Dijk as well. We've not really discussed him in this podcast, but I think he's been absolutely outstanding. But defenders never seem to win it. I think he if he wasn't going to win it in 2019, he probably never will. But it's yeah. I think he will certainly be in that contention at the end of the season. But if, for example, Real Madrid win the Champions League again, if Mbappe scores the winning goal or continues to contribute in a really big way as he has done over the past couple of months, then yeah, I think people are more seduced by the idea of Real Madrid players being Ballon d'Or winners. I don't think it's rare for a Premier League player to win it, as Rodri did last season at the expense of Vinicius Junior, and you saw how Real Madrid threw the toys out of the pram then. Is the sort of Real Madrid lobbying going to be even greater than usual? I don't know, but look, in terms of actual performance level this season so far, and there's still 3 months to go, I would say Salah's been the best.
Yeah, Simon, on that Ballon d'Or conversation, you know, George Weah is still the only ever African player to have lifted that trophy. Can we say Salah is the best African player has ever been since George Weah? Some might talk about Didier Drogba and what he's done with the Ivory Coast, and obviously what he did with Chelsea and winning the Champions League. But I mean, Mo Salah's numbers are absolutely astonishing, consistently.
Yeah. Well, I suppose you've got to think about, you know, Drogba. I think his popularity and importance extends beyond football because of the role that he had in the civil war in Côte d'Ivoire. And I mean, I went there for AFCON last year, and I mean, he's the reverence with which he's held is just incredible. I mean, I remember being told a story about how he was at a bank in Abidjan, and somebody saw him and tried to approach him, and this guy just got so excited that he took all his clothes off. Now,
was not expecting that.
Sorry, but I don't think Mohamed Salah evokes that sort of excitement, you know, in Egypt.
You never know on the streets of Liverpool. I can't.
Yeah. He, you know, don't get me wrong. He is loved by a lot of people in Egypt, but he sort of stands aside almost from society. You know, it's a difficult time to be the most famous footballer that the country has ever produced at a time when it's an authoritarian regime.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I suppose the context is different between both players. Salah does a lot of things, you know, for charity and tries to help out as much as he can. But even by doing that, it sort of raises a lot of awareness around some of the things that the Egyptian state isn't doing. So he's trying to tread a careful game. But in terms of actual, importance and greatness in Europe and in the Premier League, I mean, I would say Drogba was a very important player to Chelsea, but he never produced the sort of, certainly the numbers in terms of goals that Salah has. Very, he was playing as a strong centre forward, where Salah, obviously, you might say, well, Salah's playing off the wing, so Salah scoring more goals is more impressive. But the game has changed. There's more opportunity for wide players, particularly playing on the opposite side of the pitch. Obviously, Salah's left-footed to score goals now. But I think that Salah has had a bigger impact on the Premier League than Drogba did, really, over a longer period of time. It's difficult, isn't it? Because the world changes as well, and football changes, and the players. You might say, well, Eusebio was obviously, he was born in Mozambique, right? Wasn't he? Eusebio. So
Portuguese, yeah.
So you can't discount him, can you? In terms of the impact that he's had on the game. Somebody like, I would argue even somebody like Roger Miller, sort of Cameroon, in terms of raising the profile of African football and making people stand up and actually realise, how great it can be. So there's all different ways of measuring it, really. But I mean, as a modern player, certainly the last 10, 15 years, I mean, I don't think anybody really gets close to Mohamed Salah. And what I love about his story is as well, it's not just this sort of, there was a significant period of struggle for him in Europe as well, and he got over that and proved himself again to become, such a key figure in the Liverpool team and in Liverpool's history. So I'm not really giving you a definitive answer there. I'm sorry, but I think I do think he's definitely one of the great modern footballers from Africa or any other continent, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still thinking about someone taking their clothes off and dropping, but that's a whole different conversation. I guess I just also want to just talk about, the Ballon d'Or conversation, Simon, because, this is a player that's never won it or been in the top three. How much do you think there's an obsession for him to win that? Because by being given the Ballon d'Or outright, no one can question his ability, no one can question his nationality, and no one can question what he has given to football. And, does he need Liverpool as much as Liverpool need him? Can he win it if he went to Saudi Arabia, for instance?
So, as you said earlier, George Weah was the last African footballer to win the Ballon d'Or. Since then, we've had Zinedine Zidane winning it in 1998. He was born in France, but obviously Algerian heritage. Then we have Karim Benzema, who, again, born in France, Algerian heritage. So Salah would become the first African footballer born in the continent of Africa, albeit some Egyptians, or quite a lot of Egyptians, feel quite disconnected from Africa.
Yeah, you're
right.
You're absolutely spot on. North Africa's got a very interesting relationship with the rest of Africa.
I spent quite a lot of time with Egyptians during AFCON, and they refer to the rest of Africa as if Egypt is not a part of Africa, and it is at a crossroads, between different regions. But if Salah were to win it this year, he would be the first, certainly North African or Middle Eastern footballer to win it. So it's a big, it's a big deal, a very, very big deal. I think he understands, having spent time listening to people who know him very well, he understands that to get there, he has to win the Champions League, really, to put him in that conversation. The Premier League won't be enough. He needs to get both. So it is a motivation, but the primary motivation is to win the Premier League and then the Champions League as well, because he knows that certainly without the latter of those two competitions, he's got no chance, really. Because it does. I think I wrote a piece last week about how I think that out of the last 18 winners of the Ballon d'Or, 13 have either won the Champions League or the World Cup in that year. So it says quite a lot about how people tend to react to those achievements. And as Oli says, it would just take Real Madrid to beat Liverpool in the final and Mbappe to score a hat-trick, and then he's the best player in the world, isn't he? In a lot of people's heads, they haven't been assessing sort of the overall season to some degree. But yeah, I mean, I think it definitely motivates him. It's definitely something that he's desperate to do. And going back to the start of this season, I mean, when I was writing the book about him, I was told in August, that he felt then that this was his season, which it really shook me as quite a thing, really, because as Oli said earlier in the conversation, he wasn't great last season. He had the conversation around his injuries were understandable. I was in the ground in Abidjan when he pulled his hamstring, and I thought, this is a big moment. This in his season, in Liverpool season, in Salah's career, you don't see this sort of thing happen to him, and it happened, and it did take time for him to get back. My mitigation for him was that he was trying to get back into the team at a time when there were several other players who'd been injured, all trying to get up to speed, just to the point when Liverpool had to put a run together to go and try and win the league. And I think it was just a bit too much for everybody. This is while, Jurgen Klopp's announced that he's leaving the club as well. So there's not a lot of emotion swirling around the club. But yeah, he was convinced in the summer that this was going to be a big season for him. He spent, a big part of the pre-season tour, there's no researching, his own game and analysing his own game. I remember being told that, in the hotels in the US, he spent his evenings watching, the coverage of the games, the friendly matches that he just played, to try and understand what Arne Slot wanted out of him so he could become better. He come back in such lean condition, and
his shape looks insane.
It's just ridiculous. So he put it all together. I think Liverpool are close to winning the Premier League. They're not far away. Still some distance from winning the Champions League. It's still very difficult competition to win. They haven't got a favourable draw, really. I think PSG. We finished, top of the group and get PSG. It's a bit. It doesn't seem right to me, but so they got PSG and then potentially Villa after that, and then I think it's Barcelona. So is that right? Would that be Barcelona in the semis? I think
it could be Arsenal. It could be Real Madrid.
Yeah, sorry, I'm guessing. I'm obviously thinking too far ahead. Yeah. But it's not going to be like 2022 when Liverpool had a favourable run to the final. I would say they were quite lucky that year. If they're going to win that competition this year, they're going to really, really have to prove that they are. Very much the best team in Europe.
I also think there's a very reasonable reality where Salah wins the Premier League and the Champions League with Liverpool this season in such great form and goes, you know what? There's nothing. I don't know if I'll ever replicate this again. I mean, it's such a great season for him. Would you begrudge him for just saying, look, if Liverpool do so well this season, right, that's it. Club legend. I don't care what happens, but I've done all I need to do. I want something else.
I think there's a bit of brinksmanship going on really at the moment between the players' side and the club, because obviously the player knows that he's the main man at Liverpool. You've reeled off all the stats in the podcast, haven't we? Liverpool on the face of it, can't really be without him at the moment. Who else scores all those goals? Certainly, if they were to try and replace him, it's going to cost the club a lot of money financially, really. Unless the scouting department is, way ahead of everybody else and just knows that somebody is going to come in from, like Salah did. I suppose he did do it once. You wouldn't have. Albeit, the scout who really pushed for Salah is no longer with the club, Dave Fallows. So, meanwhile, I think the club knows really there's only a very narrow market for the player because of his age. The reality is it can't compete with Saudi Arabia if they're, as it seems, going to offer the player an exorbitant amount of money. I don't really actually think it's about money as such. I just think from Salah's perspective, he wants the mark of value for a top player in Europe, not in the Saudi league, if that makes sense. I think what's maybe complicated things a little bit over the last couple of months is Erling Haaland's contract at Manchester City. Now, obviously, Mohamed Salah isn't looking for a 10-year contract. And as you know, I wrote the story in December about it's not actually about the length of the terms, it's just about the amount of money that he's going to get paid by Liverpool. So I think that if he were to be given a contract which shows that he is still considered one of the best players in the Premier League and the world and is still an important player at Liverpool, that's what he's looking for, basically, that sort of contract. Not the sort of contract which sends him backwards. So yeah, there's quite a lot of context to it. I mean, I think instinctively, I mean, he's made it clear. I think he does want to stay. I don't think he's playing a game there. I mean, it's quite unusual to see this from Liverpool because Liverpool have been so used to the top players leaving. You know, we spoke about Suarez earlier. I mean, Liverpool desperate for him to stay. They couldn't keep him. Now
Coutinho,
you've got a player,
similar, yeah.
Coutinho. Now you've got a player. I think he knows that Liverpool is right for him. You know that the environment there is right. I think there is a possibility that if he went elsewhere, he might not be quite as effective. You know, he knows it as well that Saudi Arabia, you know, okay, it's got all the money, but it's still a developing country in terms of its football infrastructure. You know, I just don't think it suits him for all sorts of different reasons. But the bottom line is, if Liverpool can't match what his estimation of himself is, then there might be, you know, there is going to be a problem. And you know, it's a bit like, sorry, I'm repeating this as well, but it's a bit like, you know, the Monty Don scene in Partridge, where Partridge offers him a certain amount of money, it just keeps on going up and 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 up, and then eventually Don breaks and Partridge gets him. You know, it's like that. Sorry for listeners who might not have a clue who Monty Don.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking
is.
about Africans and like people in the US.
well,
go find it on YouTube. Yeah, go find it on YouTube.
Go and watch it. You know, everybody has the price.
But Oli, this is an interesting one though, isn't it? Because it's quite a precarious situation, I think. You know, you look at it from Salah's side, he wants his value and he wants his worth. But if he leaves Liverpool, there's not many teams in the world other than Saudi that can afford that kind of money. But also, I know you mentioned it at the top and it got me thinking as well. I mean, you only have to look at Kevin De Bruyne yesterday to see that, you know, the guy from the season before at a particular age isn't going to be the guy you're going to get the season after necessarily. And I know De Bruyne's had a major injury, but he just hasn't looked the same kind of guy. Yeah,
and is he 1 year older? Yeah, I think he's 1 year older. I think De Bruyne's the same age as Van Dijk, but De Bruyne has played well. He plays a position where you're constantly, you know, those high intensity sprints up and down. It's not just Salah sprinting down the wing with the ball, you know, 10, 15 times a game. That the position that De Bruyne plays takes even more out of players physically. He's had a lot of injuries the last few years. I didn't enjoy watching him yesterday. I absolutely love him as a player, but it was sort of sad to see him so far diminished, really. And look, he will still have moments this season where you think, look, that's Kevin De Bruyne, but it feels like he's gone from being their go-to guy in every game to being somebody who might come good, you know, maybe once a week, maybe not back-to-back games, to somebody who's probably, you're looking for moments now over the course of a season, and City's reliance on him has increased at a time when he and others have diminished physically. It's a real shame from Man City's point of view and from his point of view, and you would struggle to make a really strong case for them keeping him next season unless it was to be at a reduced wage. And I love him as a player, but I see him as somebody who is in that decline. And look, it can come, and it does come with every player in the end. We see, you know, somebody like Cristiano Ronaldo, and you say, well, look, he's ageless. Look, his numbers are still incredible, but he's not the player he was. You know, he's 40 now. Of course, he's not the same player he was at 32, 33. Messi slowed down in some ways, remained incredibly effective, but they've gone to different leagues, and this is two of the greatest players of all time, not just their generation, but two of the greatest players of all time. So it's I think we're being conditioned to think that players can go on forever, but they will all hit. Even Van Dijk, who's been incredible this season, there will come a point where strikers are going past him a lot more easily than they used to, and maybe he'll only be able to start one game a week rather than starting every game. Maybe it'll become the same with Salah, and so there are difficult calculations to make for Liverpool. Where if and we don't know this, and as I said, it's the club's credit that we don't know this, but if they're asking for the same money over 3 years, I think it's hard to justify that in some ways. Although you get fans saying, just give them what they want. They're incredible, give them what they want. We need to stay. What a player's value is at the age of 32 coming up to 33 might not be their value at the age of 34 coming up to 35. So I think Liverpool's best hope, if they were to give Salah a big contract, would be to be just ready, I think, to spot those signs when they eventually come, and perhaps to try to ensure that either his wages are coming down further down the contract, or that there's a means by which they might sell him later in the contract.
Yeah, Liverpool 11 points clear with 11 games to go. Let's see how this all ends. Oli, Simon, thank you so much for your time, and also thank you all for watching as well. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also leave us a comment as well. That's all for now. We'll catch you soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.